Hello, everyone. My name is Smogan, and I'm very happy to welcome you all to a very special episode of Heart of Scrolls. Today is special because we are going to be joined by none other than the lead developer of Scrolls, Måns Olsen. We're going to take advantage of this opportunity to pick his brain about the future of Scrolls as a competitive game. Welcome to the show, Måns. Glad to have you on board.
Hello, thank you. Glad to be here.
Earlier this week, we had the opportunity to take questions and discussion topics from the community over on the Scrolls subreddit, and now we've brought together a pair of longtime Scrolls players to discuss these topics with Måns. Both are very strong players, and many of you will recognize them from their many contributions to the community. So welcome back to the show, Sisp and Blinky.
Hello. Thank you.
Big thanks to all three of you for joining us tonight, and thank you to all of our viewers, both live on Twitch and on tape delay on YouTube. The Heart of Scrolls podcast tapes live on twitch.tv/The Badger Guild at about 9 p.m. GMT and is thereafter available on the Badger Guild YouTube channel. Live viewers, please feel free to post your questions in the chat. We're going to do our very best to get to any questions that we can, incorporate them into the show, but we do have a lot to talk about, so we'll just do our best. And without further delay, let's go ahead and jump right to it. Scrolls made waves last summer when it first hit open beta. Many players fell in love with the complex interactions between traditional trading card game mechanics and the hex board. Of course, like all games, Scrolls has borrowed some elements from other games in the genre. Måns, will you talk a little bit about some lessons that the team has learned from other similar games and incorporated into Scrolls?
Sure. I'm totally not as prepared for this as I should have been.
Neither are we.
All of us on the team have obviously played a whole bunch of other collectible card games. Myself, I primarily played Magic: The Gathering, and then also lots of non-collectible card games like Dominion, Ascension, and like. And specific lessons. Are we looking for examples here?
Anything you can give for me. I'm a
like
huge
that.
MTG fan, so I'm always happy to hear you make a comparison between the two games.
So we like a lot of things about Magic: The Gathering, but there's some things that can't really be done well in a digital format. So things like having health that can be reduced and stay that way, permanent, persistent health changes, lots of counting, the whole countdown mechanism. Those are things that are different from Magic that we're able to do since we're going digital. And on the other hand, Magic can do things that we really can't. So things like instants to respond to things during turns. That's something that is much more difficult to do in a digital environment than it is in real life. Stacks of events and the like.
I think that's a good point, and I feel like I've seen most digital card games moving away from interaction on your opponent's turn. Some still do it, most obviously Magic: The Gathering online, but for the most part, they're playing either trap cards or some other element that you do on your own turn to try to simulate that interaction.
I actually saw a talk by Richard Garfield, the Magic designer at GDC last year, where he said that if he was to design a new collectible card game for digital platforms, he would not have instants.
Interesting.
So that felt good.
I'm going to have to seek that out. That's interesting.
Yeah. Probably a good call also because there's so much nuances in the live game that are really hard to capture within the digital one. And I think you guys are doing a good job of staying away from that and actually tailoring to the strengths of the digital format, because especially that and the clarity of what's happening. And if you're ever trying to watch, for instance, the Star City Games Open on Twitch, and you try to follow the turns, it's very hard to tell what's going on there, even though they have great production for that show. But it's very hard to tell what's in the player's hand. It's very hard to tell where they're at in the turn because you can't hear the players talk and all of that. So it's you're missing out on a lot of things. And I think we're going to get into it a little bit later, but I think Scrolls has a better chance of being clear when it comes to being viewed digitally, so you can see what's going on much easier and understand what's happening. And it's much more physical, if you will, then you can tell what's going on, even though that you know less of the game, I think, than with Magic. With Magic, you almost have to be playing the exact. You almost have to have experience with the exact decks that they're having to understand what's going on.
I can echo that because I've watched some MTG tournaments on Twitch trying to follow, and I haven't played competitive Magic in a few years. And I feel like I just don't know anything and I can't follow at all. Whereas I feel like somebody watching Scrolls more casually might have a better chance at least following that a unit is attacking it at a given time.
Absolutely, you can see that they're moving into position to attack something else, so you can tell from the movements, for instance, what the player is trying to achieve. I think a little bit more. Now, obviously, we're biased because we know how to play Scrolls, but I think that it's more tangible than what's happening in MCG. I think.
Well, speak for yourself. I'm not biased.
Blinky, I'm going to direct this next question to you. We know that Scrolls is not a perfect game by any means. No game is. From a competitive standpoint, what would you like to see improved for Scrolls gameplay?
Good question. I think the spectate mode at the moment is quite fine. We've added the test server patch where you can now join a game before it's actually happening. That's going to help. We just need more people. That's all we need, really. And I'm not an expert on that sort of thing, so I can't really give you an answer.
Well, I think you mentioned the spectate mode. I think something that could boost that would be an integrated replay feature, which is, I know, something that the team has talked about doing, and that's probably not on the top of the to-do list, but I think that would really help as far as getting really good games out there. And there's some mods to do it right now, but it's always nice when things are built into the user interface.
From what I see, the competitive scene is generally driven by the community, and that just means we need more people who are actually committed in terms of higher tier, because at the moment it's just a few of us trying to get things going. So we need just more people coming along, setting up things, and things will be going fine.
As for replay feature, we do have that internally. We're using it for debugging, but it's not quite that polished. And the main reason it's not live is that it will break with every patch, essentially. So you won't be able to view old replays that are older than a patch.
That makes sense. And Sisp, I'll go to you with this one. We mentioned a weakness or two, but could you talk about maybe some things that you think Scrolls has as a strength, maybe in comparison to other competitive card games?
Sure. I think that I played a lot of TCGs over the years. I think it's almost played it I think I started playing Magic in '94 or something like that. So it's 20 years almost.
Dating yourself.
Yeah, tried to play most of the things that came out after that. Some of them semi-competitively. But I think that the latest part now, we're getting into the digital, and they're getting more shaped. A lot of them have these really. They have these. Almost early problems, early design problems. They're starting from the wrong end, and they end up in these really awkward trades. It's almost like if you ever played the game Doom Trooper, which was a really early TCG around the time of Magic. I think it was mostly played in Sweden and Scandinavia. But it was based on the Mutant Chronicles universe, and the problem was that little bit there that large creatures won. It was very, very, very limited in effects. There was ton of scrolls. There was ton of cards that were completely unusable in those, and you can open packs, and it was just like a lot of things that was just chaff. You just throw it away, and then you had a small core of like the really competitive things, and there was no variety. I think Scrolls is doing a very good job of not having those early game issues. You can have small creatures be viable. You can have large creatures be viable. The resource sacking is really elegant in the sense that you don't have those mana screws. Also, I mean, that's probably Magic's biggest flaw.
I agree with that.
The fact that, I mean, it's the mana is there for a reason. It's both beautiful and horrible at the same time. I watched a versus video today with two professional players playing two decks that they wanted to showcase. Was really cool. They played 5 games and 4 of them was decided on mana screw. So it wasn't the best entertainment for a video, I think. and you don't really have that in Scrolls now. And also now with the mulligan feature, you tend to have very stable draws in general. So both decks can actually usually get out what they want out of the game, and that makes for fairly satisfying games. So I think that's something that the Scroll is doing fairly well at the moment. That it seems to be a little bit more mature than a lot of other things that have come out recently, and I think it's a good thing.
One of the reasons it might be more mature is it's been in development for so long. I know that in our chat we see that in the Scrolls Alpha trailer, scrolls in your hands were curved to sort of mimic what it felt like to hold a scroll. Why is this idea no longer in the game, Måns?
Well, the most important reason is that we redesigned the UI, and we thought it looked more elegant with them just lined up and not being curved. But apart from that, it also increases readability, so it's easier to understand what's in your hand, and it makes it easier to handle having loads of scrolls in the hand. It just works better.
So it's a UI decision more than anything else.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've been talking about competitive play, and right now ranked games and tournament games, most of the tournaments are run by the community, make up the majority of competitive play. Many players are hoping that these features will be expanded as Scrolls grows in popularity, assuming that the player base is able to grow. Other games, both inside and outside the trading card game genre, have introduced ladder seasons in the past, in which ratings are regularly wiped to allow for a sort of fresh start. A few months ago, Scrolls underwent a sort of one-time ratings wipe, and it was generally greeted, in my opinion, quite favorably by the player base. Blinky, will you talk a little bit about what you think of the idea of a regular ladder season like that?
Yes, I can answer this one because I would be in favour of sort of ranked seasons. At the moment, it does get to a point where it kind of ends. I mean, as we saw previously, when people leave, gaps do appear in the rankings and things do slow down. So I think, and when we saw when the rankings were reset, we saw this huge burst of people playing again, and that was great to see. So I think ranking resets like every few months or so would be nice. Yeah, I'd be in favour of it. At the moment, it's fine. The ranking is competitive, but we do see people slowing down and things. So I think to get people going, then ranking reset would be nice.
So, Måns, what is the team? Go ahead.
So I'm imagining with if we did have seasons, we'd get rid of the rating decay and just have the seasons instead. I kind of see both positive sides and negative sides of it, and I'm not quite sure where I stand on it, to be honest. One effect that seasons can have and have had for me in StarCraft 2, for example, is that I essentially stopped playing after it was reset because I wasn't interested in grinding my way back up to the rank I was previously. So there's certainly both types of players, and I'm not sure which group is bigger, but I also like the idea of having ranking resets to give new players the chance to reach the top. So.
Well, there is that achievements where you need to get like first, top 10, that sort of thing. That's much harder to do unless some sort of ranking reset happens.
That way it doesn't stagnate at the top too bad.
Yeah, slightly.
If
it wants to be competitive, then I think it has something like that.
What were you going to say?
It's difficult to solve that. Yeah, it's difficult to solve in a sense. I mean, you kind of want to reward the players that reach certain levels also and keep them incentivized throughout the season and all of that. But it feels like when it's one ladder that's always there and never gets reset and never goes away, there's no natural end to anything, and that might mean also that people will need to set goals for themselves. I mean, I think me and Blinky are two examples of individual goal setting also, where the game is not incentivizing us to do something, but now we're trying to challenge ourselves in different ways. I mean, Blinky has done his no rares challenges and trying to climb like that. No rank, climb without playing rank.
My no ranked
that
ranks
works.
challenge is very
That's
hard.
the next level.
I'm not getting very
And
far.
I recently
Sounds tricky.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
it
I
is.
recently challenged myself not to play energy now for a while and try to figure out if I can climb with that instead. So I tried to drop 300 points. It was fairly easy. It turned out it went very fast. And then trying to climb actually with new decay decks now instead. So it kind of rekindles it for me too, because I've played energy for quite some time now. But there also could be a way of doing this within the game from the developers as well. Is it needed? Not really sure, but it's that's usually how achievements and rewards work. That they try to incentivize a behavior, for instance, like playing a lot or keeping. Basically keep people interested. So you could try to artificially build that into the system as well, and not just make sure that the players are challenging themselves with organizing tournaments and creating their own goals.
For sure, and that it's a very good point. And I mean, it's not at all impossible that we will introduce seasons. I'm not sure at this point, but I do think that they would make more sense now that we have the ranks, the medals that is that are coming just recently put on the test server. I think they'll provide greater incentive to play towards a certain goal. You set a goal like I want to be a master caller or whatever, and then play towards that. And I think seasons kind of mix nicely with that. I'm not sure.
I agree. I think go ahead.
No, sorry. Go for it.
Well, I was going to say what would make me a very happy Scrollger would be if the rankings, the new badges were incorporated, and at the end of every ladder season, a month or 2 or 3 months or whatever that would be, everybody within a particular badge would then go into an in-game tournament of sort, and then you would have the champion of the top badge, a champion of the second badge, so on and so forth. Has the team thought about having more in-game tournament support?
Oh, we have, for sure. We've thought about it several times. There used to be a button saying tournaments that was grayed out.
I do recall, yeah.
That was then replaced in favor of judgment. The idea is something that we really like, but the actual implementation of it, not technically, but like how it should work UI-wise, when you should wait for other players, how long you need to commit to be in a tournament, all those questions make it kind of a complicated issue. And we've found that tournaments are something that the community can arrange in a very good way. It's definitely something that I'd like in the game, but it's also something that's quite a lot of work in comparison to what it gives, and in comparison to other features.
I have a question for you also, Måns, around the topic of seasons. Do you think that it's a good idea or not to base this around the set releases?
Great question.
The seasons?
Yeah.
I'd like the seasons if possible. I mean, I do think it would be a good idea in the sense that releasing a set in the middle of a season could kind of mess things up a little bit. Would mess with balance and depending on who got what scrolls and so on and so forth. But at the same time, set releases aren't something that we've been able to do on a regular basis. We've done them often enough, but well, arguably.
But you can't guarantee they're going to be every 3 months, for example.
We've found it hard to guarantee that, yeah, for sure. And I think there's value to having ladder seasons have that regularity, saying you have exactly 3 months from this date. After that, something will happen. After that, you'll claim your rewards or whatever. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's an interesting topic just to, because you can see, for instance, in MTD how the set releases and the rotations are
Built
it's
to go
usually
together.
coming at the time. It's usually coming at a time where it's shaking up stuff, where the meta game has gone stale. I mean, they have a much larger player base and a very professional one as well. So they're finding the strong decks faster than we can at the moment. But on the other hand, those things tend to shake up the meta, and we can see that also with Rebellion, for instance, that it changed a lot of the meta. The question is just if there is an idea of trying to have a champion, for instance, in a particular meta, like for instance in the Rebellion meta, that the ladder is set after that, and then you can tell that the strongest player at that point was X because they were at the top the longest and won the most, etc. And then in the next meta, someone else might be stronger. So it's now we're talking about a very small part of the player base, of course, that will care about that. But it could be interesting. It's just interesting to see how if there is benefits of having that. If there is any resets to where this is supposed to be in comparison to the set releases. But if you don't have a regular flow for it, it might be hard to achieve, I think.
Yeah, I like the idea of having it match set releases from a meta and from the perspective of what do you have going into the season. But I'm not sure if it's viable. I'll have to think about it more.
It'd be definitely more difficult to do earlier in the game's development than perhaps after release when you have more regular, organized schedule coming out and things like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm going to take this opportunity to transition into a conversation about the wild resources. The developers have regularly asked the community to help test certain features through the Testing Grounds multiplayer option. And currently, I think we have the largest change on the server out there, and that is, of course, the wild resources that make building and playing multi-faction decks much easier, or at least more palatable for a lot of people. Måns, how would you characterize the overall feedback the team has received regarding wild resources from the player base?
I think it's been mostly good. There was some initial confusion when people didn't really understand how it worked. Or how to use it, and it's understandable. It's something that's not super easy to explain. The concept of not being able to sacrifice for this resource unless you have at least that much in all other resources included in your deck. It's kind of it's not super intuitive when you say it that way, but when you actually encounter it in the game, I feel it's not too tricky to understand. The UI helps a lot.
Something we need to show in a tutorial rather than just explain in some text boxes.
Yeah, for sure. And the reception has been mostly good. There's been slightly less feedback than I would like. So with that in mind, I think we might have to put it just across all game modes in the live client to make sure that we get the amount of feedback that we need, and try that out for a while. And if that works, then that's fantastic. If it doesn't, if we find problems, we'll have to rethink it.
Blinky, do you feel like Scrolls is a better game with Wild implemented, or about the same, or what do you think?
I think Scrolls would be a better game if multi-resource decks were viable. I don't know if Wild is the answer. I think what needs to be tested with Wild most is normal decks against multi-resource decks. So that's not really going on at the moment, I don't think. I think it's more, I've got a fun Wild deck, let's play your fun Wild deck, let's see what happens. So we don't really learn much there.
Almost like a different game mode than just testing true competitive play.
Yeah, so I think what would need to happen is a proper sort of sit down, let's actually get on with some testing sort of thing. We need a group of people to actually do it properly, which we could do, I suppose. But we need like proper decks that have been used in ranks, played against decks which have been refined to use Wild. See if they're fine against each other. If a Wild deck is completely broken and the no Wild abuse deck just doesn't stand a chance, then obviously something would need to be done. But if if normal decks stay viable and are still strong compared to the wild decks, then we know we have something that's worth looking into.
Well, I'm going to speak for my guild, the Badger Guild, really quick, and I'm just going to say, Måns, if you guys are able to set it up so that when we do a challenge match against one another, we can choose to do that challenge using wild, then that might facilitate our ability to test the more competitive side of it.
Sure, that's worth thinking about. No promises, not yet.
I'm trying to trap you, you can tell.
Yeah, we weren't bringing you on to make you sure that you force you to make promises. That wasn't the intent here.
What was I going to say? I had something there. I think if we're talking viability of mono resource versus multi-resource, we'd like both to be equally viable, but if possible, I think we should err on the side of multi-resource. That's the
interesting.
They should be equally strong, but if there's more decks in multi-resource. Just naturally, that's how it works. So I'd like as many archetypes as possible to be viable, and for that reason, if one has to be stronger, I'd like multi-resource to be stronger. Ideally, they'd be perfectly balanced, but
definitely a challenge. Sis, do you think you could talk about maybe some tweaks? And I'm sorry for putting you on the spot with a tough question. Some tweaks you'd like to see to Wild that might make it more enjoyable for you?
I think I'm in the camp where I think it's probably fine as it is. I mean, we have already talked about that. It's a little bit hard to explain, but when you get past that, it feels fairly natural. It's fairly easy to do, and especially like that it's not very fiddly. I mean, people are complaining all the time about 90-second turns, and if you had to do more administration around Wild, for instance, it would be horrible to play those turns, just to fiddle with your resources and pick, okay, now I need to pick what resources I'm actually casting this with. I mean, I think that the interface is actually great. It's the same way as you guys are using random, for instance, also on a lot of things, just to make sure that there's less choices and therefore snappier turns. I think it's a good thing. So I don't necessarily think that it would change that much. If I were to choose here, I would actually not be hesitant on putting it on ranked and you see how it fares. I mean, what's the worst thing that can happen at this point?
Just revert it, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, it is a digital card game after all. We're not printing any huge runs or anything here, so I think it's well worth trying out and see how it actually would fare. Because when it's gonna get a little bit different treatment when people are starting playing it in ranked, I think, and then you'll get that exposure fairly quickly. And as you said, I mean, if it doesn't work out, then I think you can revert it. So I would probably put it as it is at the moment. And people have been saying that yes, you need to tweak the ramp scrolls. I think that the memorials were the problem from the start. They are now not very viable. So at this point, they're a little bit off the table. It would be nice to see them return to some kind of form, but they're at least out of the picture of the abusable part.
Nice.
And the other ramp scrolls are much more fair and fun. So I think that at this point, it seems to be fairly balanced. I would probably say that. A lot of the current mono resource decks would have a great game versus a lot of the wild decks, and there will probably be some that beats some of them. But that's how it's supposed to be. I mean, I don't think that any of them would have those overpowering number of great matchups. So if it were up to me, I would probably put it on live as it is and see what happens.
We were actually thinking of putting it across all game modes on the test server with this patch. We didn't quite make it in time to do that, but it's very likely we'll put Wild across all game modes on test soon, and then probably on live after that.
That's very
Reset
interesting.
my ladder whilst you do it, because that'll be fun.
Sorry?
Ladder climb. Reset my ladder whilst you're at it as well.
Oh, man.
That'll be fun.
That would be-
Just a fresh ladder, and suddenly we've got this world just to test as well. It'll be madness. It'll be brilliant. Just
what
for a
deck
week.
would be at the top of the ladder
that would-
after a week?
That would be very
Oh.
interesting, but we'd also test
God knows.
two completely separate things at the same time.
This is true.
which-
Good point.
Which can be problematic. It's harder to tell what's going well and what isn't.
Well, you've already kind of tested the ranking reset. Just do it, please. It'll be fun.
I'll consider it. Yeah.
Sis mentioned that, and I think I'm going to try to quote him here. He said that the off-color ramp scrolls are fair and fun. Måns, would you agree with that characterization?
Are we talking about the in and out of decay ones plus
Yeah.
efficiency now?
Yes, yes, those.
That's
Yeah.
I think so. Those were designed after the memorials when we knew a lot more about how the game worked. I think they're much more fun. They're designed in a way so that they're almost strong enough to be included in the deck if you don't play multi-resource, because they need to be that strong to be viable in multi-resource.
Like Return
And
to
then
Nature.
if you do play multi-resource, they're probably slightly stronger than regular scrolls.
You could already tell that with Return to Nature, for instance. That was a bit over the top, I think, before the nerf even, because the effect itself was a mini quake in a lot of cases. So for 2, so obviously the getting a growth there was. You didn't need to have that to play the scroll. I have been tempted to add Dark Strikes into the mono energy decks just because I want more sparks, and it's as you say, it's almost at that level where it's actually viable to use. So a lot of them are very very interesting. Bigger Extraction is also fun. There is a few clunkers. You probably know which ones there are. You've kind of fixed the road, I think, a lot with the last change, but yeah, there is some of them are still a little bit weird. But I think that overall it's looking very very well at the moment for those, and probably the other factions should receive the same kind of treatment to get those instead of trying to only have memorials for those.
I'm picturing maybe a mix of them. We don't have any of those. We don't have any ramp scrolls cross resource in the current set planning for the next set, which is focusing on a new mechanic that
Interesting.
I don't know if I should talk about yet. So,
But we'd be so excited to hear.
yeah, but I didn't actually talk to the team about whether we should mention that. So I probably shouldn't.
Type it
I
in
respect
chat.
that.
Staying clear.
But sorry, go ahead.
Don't breach any NDAs. We still want you on the team, so I think it's.
I don't think I'm under an NDA, not to my knowledge.
You're the boss. You'd be the one to set it.
But yeah, so what I can say is that for the new set, we're focusing again and even more heavily on synergies, which is a new thing in Rebellion. We realized that the one thing that energy was lacking was synergies. There is very little going on that was interaction between the scrolls, unlike Decay, where there is lots of synergy around death, and Order, where there was lots of synergy around positioning, but energy didn't really have any of it. So we created the theme of resource synergy. Current resources you have, increasing and spending temporary resources, things like that.
And I feel like that's been pretty successful. Obviously, energy is very good now, whereas in the past it was less than very good. But overall, I just feel like your guys' design philosophy has really matured in the last year or so. Decay was the first effort towards, like you said, making a really integrated design, and then energy has followed. Will you talk a little bit about maybe where growth might be going or Order might be going in the future as far as a more focused design?
Absolutely. So for Order, we're going to be focusing more heavily on positioning and things that happen while you're in play. So things like the infantrymen, ducal and royal infantrymen, they give us bonuses to a row. Royal vanguard, honorable general, they give bonuses to adjacent units at certain points. Wings captain, all of those are all about positioning, and that's the kind of mechanic that we want to explore more for Order in the new set. Growth, on the other hand, we want it to be about units coming into play. So Wildling is an example of a scroll that has synergy with other creatures as it comes into play. But Wildling is not one of the strongest scrolls in the game.
One of the most fun, though.
It could possibly use a buff, to be honest. But that type of mechanic is something that we'll be exploring more. And so we were very pleased to see Skythorn, one of the winners of the design competition. That just fits that theme very nicely. With the drawing a scroll every X turns as creatures come into play, which is nice.
So congratulations to the creator of Skythorn for successfully reading the Scrolls development team mind. Good job on you.
Well done.
Does that mean that you'll add more inspiring then within the next set?
Or just general it comes into play effects?
It's definitely possible, but scrolls that have a bonus as they come into play, they sort of have that synergy or the power built in a little bit. What we want to look into is interaction between the scrolls primarily. So most of all, we're thinking about scrolls that make things happen as other units come into play.
So you trigger off something else happening. Okay, yeah.
How much does Rat King affect your design space with that? Because you have a really well-costed scroll that can bring 3 creatures into play at once. Is that limiting anything?
Well, we're probably going to be making Rat King stronger, aren't we?
Yeah.
But Rat King is actually not such a problem, I feel. It's a spell, so it'll happen once. It'll be stronger because you get more creatures if you have certain units on the board. But then it's over. Sister of the Owl, on the other hand, there was 1 unit with 2 more units coming out that could then be resummoned in various ways. It's a more complicated scroll in that respect, limiting the design space more. So that's part of the reason that we've now changed it to summon only 1 owl and then buffed the owls instead.
Oh, interesting.
The other reason is that owls are now more viable. We wanted to make them something you could potentially include in the deck as its own thing, without needing the Sister of the Owl, really.
Yeah, definitely.
And you just wanted the mascot for the owl stream to be better in general?
It's such a cute owl also on that one. I get
I've
glad
said
seeing
nothing.
more play. Yeah.
Can I just jump in on Order quickly? Because
Please do.
I think Order needs a bit of more extra added layers, because at the moment it's kind of, you do have separate kind of decks, but they're all doing the same thing. Where you've got late game Order and you've got tempo Order, and they're both just like either slower or quicker versions of each other. They're both just like movement, attack. So I think Order needs something extra. Like Decay's got poison, or just sort of normal creatures. Grove's got enchantments, or sort of normal stuff.
And then
energy
It has
structures.
poison, it has idle hate, it has curse.
And Order is basically just at the moment creatures, positioning, moving stuff. So I would like to see something extra for Order, as an extra sort of strategy for the deck to be based around.
That makes sense, and I definitely felt that Order could use more punch after Rebellion. There is a layer of coolness that we want in the resources that wasn't quite there. So we'll definitely be looking at that for the next set. Exactly how that'll work, I'm not quite sure yet. The movement stuff is what we primarily want Order to be about, the main sort of theme. Spell synergy is another one. So things that interact with casting spells, possibly casting enchantments, and then cheap enchantments and spells, cantrips, things like Kabong, Flip, Pother. Well, Flip isn't a cantrip, but still.
Can I say that? I mean, I've given you a lot of praise now. Can I complain a little bit also? I think that one of the things I'm seeing a little bit disturbing with Order is the cantrip part, and it's obviously, as you say, it's part to do with that you give an Order the movement effects, and in themselves, I remember when they were in and they weren't cantrips in Alpha, they were fairly weak. I mean, they weren't worth a scroll, most of them, even when they were costing 1. Because you could do better with the creature and so on, but it's a little bit disturbing on how many cantrips there seems to be added onto Order. And I rather have the effects be a little bit more splashy than doing the easy way out. And it's like, okay, this is not really strong enough, but we want it in the game. Okay, let's add another card draw to it, and then it will get played. Even if you do multiple effects, like for instance, that weird rework of Roasted Bean Potion actually turned out fairly well, I think, just because you have 2 interesting effects. The movement itself wasn't interesting enough, but the burst when it comes into play made it playable, and you had two synergistic effects on a single scroll that didn't draw a scroll. And I think that was actually one of the cases where you hit the nail a lot in a really good way. When it comes to like doing an effect that is a movement effect that is not has a card draw attached to it and is still very, very playable. So I think more of those and less of the draws, because the draws also do you end up in these not so interesting situations where you're cycling podders and you're kabonking in unimportant stuff, and it would be more fun if the plays themselves were a little bit more meaningful. And not just cantripping for cantripping's sake.
I see what you're saying, and I agree to some extent. I definitely want to have viable spell effects that are not cantrips, but I also kind of like them. I think there's room for both. Essentially, we've been talking internally in the office about other ways that we can do things that are reminiscent of cantrips, but that aren't really cantrips. So, for example, you could have a scroll that increases your current wild resource, which is essentially boosting your mana, letting you play the next scroll more cheaply, that you could do without having to draw cards and without affecting later turns. So there's other forms of bonuses that aren't quite cantrips, and that's a little bit what happened with Roasted Bean Potion as well, I think.
Oh God, don't get me started on Roasted Bean Potion.
How much of a fan are you of the Roasted Bean Potion rework?
Let me get back to that in 1 second. I just like to point out that I also want spell synergy to be a theme. We have very little of that so far. There's essentially just the Resonant Helm. Which is not the greatest scroll in the world.
What?
Essence Feast holds that spot still.
No.
We like the idea of that, of things triggering off you playing spells and then you using several smaller spells to trigger multiple times and then sort of building up to something powerful. So that's something we're looking into for the next set.
Okay.
As long as it doesn't involve drawing scrolls.
Getting back to the Roasted Bean Potion, that change was made when I was away.
Passing the butt on that one.
Carlos, a bomber boy, myself, and a few of us had a quick chat in IRC. We were like, "Do you change it to this?" We're like, "Yeah, go for it." So it's like,
I like that it's more powerful, and I like the way that it's more powerful. But I liked the idea of having the scroll be about movement. I like the idea that movement is the main thing of it, and that is no longer the case. It is now a countdown buff with a side effect of increasing your movement.
Indeed.
So I'm not personally a huge fan of the flavor, but I like that the scroll itself is stronger.
I think it should be.
It's interesting, I think, in a way that it wasn't before. And I said it in an earlier podcast I like the way that you could use that template for more enchantments. I think with weak lingering effects and then a spell-like effect when it comes into play. That is a template that you can use a little bit more.
Yeah. Enchantments are always tricky. For growth, we've tried to make it a theme, which works to some extent. That makes them stronger. And for the other resources, there's definitely room to improve enchantments, especially low-costing ones. And we have some ideas for how to do that on a larger scale, but nothing is set in stone or done yet.
I think that they are getting a lot of flack to the enchantments for being unplayable. The thing is that they are more playable, for instance, than within MTG because there is no instance. So if you have power enchantments, for instance, or attack enchantments, then you'll get the buff out of it for sure. So and then have the lingering effect of staying in play and buffing the unit. So I think that a lot of them are more strong than it. It seems to be. The ones that are tricky are the ones that are protecting at the moment because they can be played around, and that's where you're at the risk of getting 2-for-1 with Potion of Resistance, for instance, or Oak Blood, or some of the ones that are buffing health, because a lot of them can be removed at once. So they seem to be harder to balance. But the power generating, the attack generating ones are probably stronger than people give them credit for.
Sure. The attack ones, they're the easiest to make, essentially, because we know that they'll be played if they're good enough value. Other enchantments, that's much harder to say.
Well, there's a lot of room for more improvement in the future on those. That'll be interesting to see. We talked a little bit about growth and order. Will you talk about a little bit, Måns, how decay or energy might evolve in the next set?
More beetle stones.
Or beetle stones, how they're going to evolve?
They'll, beetle stones will start in your hand, all of them.
Oh, good.
You introduce a scroll called Beetlestone 2 that counts as Beetle Scroll. Yeah.
Maybe, or maybe not. I'm not quite sure yet. So decay, I feel that is very much Bommy Boy's baby. There's some really cool interactions going on in there. We just went over all of the almost finalized designs. I'm really excited about how Decay is turning out, but we have the identity down. I think there's not that many entirely new sort of synergies or the like, but the scrolls themselves are new and flashy.
So the feel for Decay is more finalized than the other three factions. Is that fair to say?
I would say so, yeah. And energy, we're seeing a return of Gravelocks.
Really?
A bunch of them.
Confirmed. Wow.
Which I'm excited about.
Yeah.
Adding back smaller of the subtypes and expanding upon that, hopefully making it a viable option to the different ranged human or structure lobber decks.
Well, that's going to make me go right back to playing energy instead of Decay if the Gravelocks come back.
Yeah, sounds interesting.
Another question I have for you is that most of the time game designers have a somewhat of a good feel for what scrolls or cards or whatever they create are going to be good, but sometimes some will catch them by surprise. Do you have an example of a scroll that maybe you expected to be pretty darn good, but ended up not being played very much?
Can I think about that question?
Please do, yeah.
I don't have one off the top of my head.
Maybe we can butt in with some of our predictions that went fairly horribly wrong, because me and Blink have made some.
Yeah, you guys have made plenty of bad predictions. Why don't you talk about that?
We made plenty of good ones as well, but there's some clunkers.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Imperial resources being too expensive at 6, I think was
At
one
6?
of them. Yeah.
Whoops.
Whoops. Why would you ever give up a turn for that? I think was one of the quotes.
We were young.
We were young, yeah.
At
Much
least I
wiser
was.
now.
Anything you
Can't remember,
overestimated?
we did the decay set together. We probably have some clunkers in there as well.
We did. I'll get that up now. So carry on.
It could be interesting to see what we actually wrote in there. I haven't gone back to visit that. I think we were fairly on par with Harvester being a complete 5, for instance. I think so we got most of them right, I think, but there's probably some horrible clunkers in there. Yeah,
So,
I remember I was really infatuated with Viscera Sage from the beginning, until I realized it was the Sister of the Fox that didn't draw your scroll right away. Then I was a little bit more sad.
I agree. I thought the Sage was going to be great, but I was...
Yeah, it was like, I was feeling like this is an Ophidian of the Ophidian of scrolls.
Right.
This is the control.
But then
the
everyone played
creature,
Langblade or Spark and it was over.
It later respawned. It later respawned and came back as hired smuggler and actually did what it was supposed to do from the beginning. So
we gave Mangy Rat 3
always.
out of 5.
This is not going well. Sorry. We always know to look out for draw and ramp in particular. We know a lot of the time that that's probably going to be pretty strong, but then we kind of want to test it in any case, and sometimes we end up on the wrong side of things. Animovore is a good example of one that I kind of didn't really expect to be that strong. Animovore and Scavenger Construct was a planned combo, something that we wanted players to use, but I thought it would be kind of weak, and it has proven not to be.
it is fairly weak.
Well,
It's pretty good in Judgment or in casual play, if not tearing up the
Yeah,
top
Judgment
ranks.
is a fairly different piece, but I don't think that's good. Judgment is a beast of its own, I think, when it comes to the balance. But Animal War sure has
sure, it
counters, I
depends on
think. Yeah.
yeah, no, I'm not saying it's fantastic. It's I think it's proven stronger than I expected.
Yeah.
What about the champions? Did you expect the champions to be played a little bit more?
That's a good question. I kind of didn't really know what to expect. They are the most powerful units that you can put out, but they're also very expensive, which was kind of the idea. The hope was that you'd go all the way up there and use those to sort of move the game towards the finish. And that has happened to some degree. Tia is definitely being played and it's a strong unit. The others are a little bit weaker. There's room for improvement there. They might require some balance changes. I'm not sure, but that's.
I wouldn't say the others are weak. I just
think
think the other decks are finding it hard to get up to there easily. Energy can get there.
There is definitely a connection there with having a better stall game and also having more in resource ramp, especially with Machine Chant and Echomatonics helping Tia a lot, and Power Trip when it was raining with the card draw also made it a very easy drop. So I think it's a competition on the. They're supposed to be finisher scrolls. In a sense, Energy is using it a little bit differently because it wants to have a powerful unit to dump their hand into, because it's trying to ramp. Most of the decks are trying to ramp really actively, and then in order for that to do it and not run out of cards, you sometimes need to draw a lot of power within one scroll. And Tia fits perfectly into that you have a chance of dropping one scroll and keeping one in hand, for instance, and then the next turn you can do stuff again. So it's filling a niche there that the other ones don't have. But my point was that with Necrogeddon and Godhand especially being the designated finishers for the other factions, you don't need to play that many more in those factions. It's a limit on how many of those you can put in. Godhand is a fantastic finisher. It does that job very well, and Necrogeddon also in a lot of setups. I don't know within order. I think that maybe the finishing blow there is the Honorable General with speed is the power play that you're trying to figure in the end there. So, and that does more than K for 9 resources. So it's just a lot more competition on the finishing part. I mean, energy wants multiple finishes. There's a TF fits in perfectly, but it also has Solemn and so on. So that might be an issue why they're seeing less play. Solemn is a little bit weird because it can be dropped earlier, so it has some play even earlier. But the K can never be dropped for instance. So it needs to be a finisher, and there is better options for that in order usually.
I'm interested in seeing how K will perform after the latest update that is on test now. It is no longer immune to your enchantments or spells even after Dominion, which is a slight buff since you don't always have a Dominion, but when active it should be a significant buff.
Brings Blessing of Haste back into play for her, which is great.
It is a very powerful scroll when it is on board, especially the passive effect of because the saving grace of all of the 3 other Thea is actually the worst one when it's dropped on turn, apart from when you're doing Bombard with her at the same turn. All of the other ones have a sort of an effect already when they are dropped, but it's subtle. I mean, not so subtle in your Earl's case because he's Inspire. But the other ones, I mean, newer buffs Undead that very turn that she's dropped, and K does enable the scroll draw right away when she is dropped as well. So they have a little bit stronger when it's just that very turn when it's dropped, but it's still not enough and flashy enough. I think that it warrants the very high cost there. They will end up not being played in a lot of the games, especially with how the other factions are functioning. There's more late game decks in Energy, and I think that's also why Thea is seeing more use. It's hard to tell if that buff is going to make a huge effect. The problem is not really, I think, with the power level when it's on the board, but it's the problem of actually getting it on the board. I think that's holding them back mostly.
Sure. I'd like to also mention Watcher as a scroll that I did not expect to have any sort of impact on the meta at all, which was obviously not quite the case when it was released.
5 health and 3 damage, yeah. It was fairly strong at release.
Yeah. But with the champions, is it still safe to say that even if they're not making an impact on competitive play, that they might still be fulfilling the role of just having a really cool spell that newer players can get excited about?
For sure.
Absolutely.
Does the team actively design for different types of players, like for competitive players, for casual players, or for people obsessed with bunnies or rats?
Yes. Maybe slightly less for the third of the groups.
You threw him a bone in the last set, though.
Yeah. We do design for different groups of players. The tricky thing is that we have a relatively small community, and the community is almost exclusively competitive players at this point. The ones who remain after a long period of beta are dedicated players, but we want to catch those that have left or that haven't tried it yet, and those are to some degree casual players. So I think it's very important to not forget the casual players and to sort of bring them into the game.
I think that the champion units themselves do give some additional flavor, not just because they are expensive, but actually the champion part is a bit more iconic, I think, than a lot of the other, which are more like foot soldiers units. So are you considering creating more reasonably costed champions in general, or do you still want to keep them in that expensive?
There's 4 new champions, 4 new uniques.
Interesting.
In the new set, and they're all costed significantly lower.
Okay.
I think they're currently at between 3 and 5, but I'm not entirely sure. Let me bring up my planning document to make sure.
Why don't you just read that whole thing to us?
Sure.
Link it in the chat.
No, go on.
But I think I see that the possible risk is obviously that the champion drop at this point is a very big event. If it is a bit more common, then we'll grow a little bit more used to seeing it. It will be a little bit more on the mill, but I think it's still fine. It's very interesting from a design perspective when it comes to designing decks, that you have to take into account the diminishing returns of the unique. So you could have a fairly powerful scroll there that where the correct amount of scrolls to put in is not necessarily 3. And that opens it up a bit as well. So from a deck builder standpoint, I'm very excited actually to see what they will look like. Because I'm guessing also that they will have a little bit more splashy abilities than maybe like only being relentless or
Right.
flying or something like that. If I were to venture a guess. What's that?
I said
the
no,
one
they're all
with
just
relentless and flying.
They both have both of those abilities. All of them, both of those abilities. They're between 3 and 6. So 3, 4, 5, and 6 currently.
Okay.
The new unique units.
Okay.
But those
Sounds
are
really
not
cool.
the final costs. We'll see.
Yeah. Sounds really cool.
Well,
I'm excited about them, but we'll see. We'll see how it turns out.
Well, now I'm really excited about them, and I have one last question for you, Måns, before I let you go. Will you give our Scrolls viewers something to be excited about in the next 30 days? What can they be excited about?
In the next 30 days?
Yeah.
Do I need to keep them excited during the entire 30 days or something that will happen during the 30 days?
Well, anything that will that we can be hyped about for a while. Something that we can talk about.
Wow, that's
You just gave us 3-cost champions and Gravelocks.
I know.
What more do you want?
We're gonna put out probably gonna put out Wild across all the game modes on the live server.
Okay.
I can't promise for sure it'll happen within a month, but I'd like that. I think it'd be good for testing Wild. I'm hoping we'll also have a new launcher in that time, but I'm gonna regret saying this in 30 days. I really want to replace the old launcher. There's just so much that it cannot do that we can do with the new one that's being worked on. Just portable location for the game, so it doesn't have to sit in your app data folder. Actually working, incremental downloads, so getting just what's needed for the update, not all of the game every time. Remembering your login information so that it'll log you in automatically. A little bit of news, possibly better error reporting. It might not sound like something to be excited about, but it's something I think is really, really good for the game.
Well, you've given us something for everybody, something for the people that are excited for the growth of the game as a program, and something for the people that just love champions and Gravelocks. So I'm satisfied.
Good.
Well, thank you to all of our guests for coming on, especially Måns for taking the time. I know it's probably past midnight your time, but I appreciate you staying up and chatting with us. I really, really enjoyed talking to you and learning from you and hearing about what's coming in the next few months.
Thank you for organizing the podcast. It's been fun.
Well, I hope that we can have you back in the future.
Sure.
Thank you, of course, to... Hopefully I didn't scare you off. Thank you to Blinky and Sis for being on as well, and to Ice Cream for doing all the technical work in the background, and for, of course, playing against... I think he was playing against the Overlord on the test server while we were watching. You guys should also go check out Scrollger.com. It's Orange's new site that he's developing with a lot of cool new features, especially for guilds. Go type that into your browser and check that out. And you can also find the patch notes for the most recent test server patch on Scrolls Guide and the Scrolls subreddit.
Go
Go ahead.
Sorry, can I add something?
Please.
I'd like to give a shout out to the feature that Jeb added that is not in the patch notes.
What is that?
So Jeb added the weekly winners stuff, which is we're giving a special icon, a little medal, to the top 3 positions in the ladder, and 1 icon to the player who has won the most during the week, regardless of ladder position. And that's an icon that'll be in the chat so everyone can see it. It's also on the splash page. And it happens at the end of each week, on Sunday currently, I believe. So that's currently in the game on the test server, and is something that I'm pretty excited about for competitive play.
Is that something that will just be for temporary for the week, or will be saved like in their profile for ages to come?
Right now it's temporary. Whoa. Is that not? Did I just lie? Is that not on the test server? I'm not actually seeing it. Then it will be on the test server very
Another
shortly.
thing to be excited about.
Wow.
No pressure on Jeb.
No, it's
Well done,
in the
Jeb.
game locally. It might not be in the test server. I thought it was. My bad, I guess. It'll be there shortly.
Excellent.
But that sounds a little bit like what we were talking about earlier with incentivizing on a shorter term. So interesting to see.
Yeah, so that's something that I'm excited about. That Jeb has been adding. So that's a cool feature. Thank you for that, Jeb.
Well, you have been very gracious to us with all the spoilers. I wasn't expecting to get this much. I'm pretty excited about all that. Thank you all for coming on. I think we're going to go ahead and end the show now, but for those of you that are interested, you can stick around for the after show. I cannot promise what the heck we're going to do on the after show, what the content will be. Maybe Ludwig will come on and sing again. I don't know. We'll find out. But that's all for the regular show. Thank you all for tuning in. Check us out on YouTube afterwards. And everybody go play some Scrolls.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.